Hey everybody, so recently I've had some of my students become interested in writing their own music, but a lot of them have struggled with what to do past having an initial small idea. So I thought I'd pass on some tips that I have been giving to them to you. There's a whole lot of ways to write music, and these definitely aren't the only ways, but there are three main methods that I talk to my students about because they're really easy to approach and they're not intimidating. The first method you might call building a groove or adding layers to a riff. You know, you might have an idea. And that's all you've got. Well, that's a perfectly fine starting place. In fact, this is the way that a lot of bands write music communally. Somebody will have one single kind of looped idea, and then they'll add a drum part to that, and then play that for a little bit, add the bass part to it, and then maybe add a melodic part over the top of that. And so they kind of build that in layers. In fact, that's what most of these methods are based off of, is building in layers. But that first one specifically is kind of the groove method. And a lot of the times where that's concerned, each individual groove will then be stitched together into the sections of a song. So, you know, one groove will be the verses, another one will be the chorus, and so on. Now, a lot of us do also write by ourselves, and if you've got any type of recording equipment, you can use the same exact method. Just record it onto your phone into an application like GarageBand, record it onto your computer in something like Audacity, which is free, and just kind of layer on top of your own grooves and see what happens. It can be tempting sometimes to overcomplicate it and to add more layers than is actually necessary in a certain part, but that's ultimately up to you. The next method, which is a lot of how I started out writing, is actually starting with a chord progression and then putting a melody on top of it after you've settled into it. So I could start with a really basic chord progression. There we go, that's it. And so what I would do is basically let that chord progression kind of speak to me, right? And sort of sit on it and glean the emotions and the feelings that come with it. And then I would experiment with putting a melody on top of that. In the same way as the last method that I talked about, you can create slightly variated chord progressions that can then become the different sections of your song. This seems to happen a lot too with guitarists and bass students. They'll come up with a chord progression that they really like, but then they're not sure where to go with it from there. And my answer to that is either go on and create the next section, or take a section you're already working on and figure out a melody that can go over the top of it, whether that melody is going to be played by an instrument or sung by a vocalist later on. And the last method is kind of the reverse of that. It's starting with a melody and then finding the chords to accompany it. This will often happen in the mind of a musician where, you know, you hear something and it's so singable and it's kind of playing in your head, and so you cautiously approach your instrument and you try to, where is it? And then you find it and you work it out. So there you've got a melody, and then it just becomes about what kind of chords can go underneath it. Some people choose a little bit more of an accessible approach, and so they'll use a really diatonic chord progression underneath it. Something like that. Or, you know, somebody who's trying to be a little bit more out there might choose a chord progression that's a bit more unexpected. What's what's really, really fun about this method is that it allows for reharmonization. So a lot of bands have done this with pop tunes, is they've left the melody intact but then changed all the chords underneath to bring a completely different harmonic dimension to it. But the thing is, you don't have to wait for your song to be remixed to do it. You can do it with your own melody, and you can even do it within the same song. You can start off with a very kind of accessible, pop-oriented progression, and then somewhere in the middle of it you can keep the melody the same but completely change the chords underneath to reaccommodate that, and it adds an entirely new dimension, as I said before. So those are the three methods that I talk to my students about using when it comes to beginning to approach songwriting, starting with a groove and kind of layering on top of that, starting with a chord progression and then putting a melody onto that, or starting with a melody and then finding a chord progression or different chord progressions that can go underneath that to explore some different possibilities. Hopefully that helps you in your songwriting. There are definitely some methods that I have used, but as I said, they're not the only ones. So that's my musical thought for the day, and I'll see you again soon.